is that your baptism took, or maybe that there was a time you came from death to life. Whatever it is, from that day on you said, I have to make the Lord a priority. Some of you recall a time when your life flashed before you, when you thought you were a goner and yet you lived. You walked through the Red Sea, in effect, and you said, I'm now the Lord's. I live for Him. He has been your rock. You have drawn spiritual nurture from Sunday morning worship services and the Scriptures and your prayer life and the presence of the Spirit. And the Exodus story of God freeing His people and leading them out of bondage, that story is your story as well. But here's the thing. The story of Exodus is not simply about a group of people who committed themselves to live faithfully. There are a lot more twists and turns than that. Faithfulness and failure were side by side. And consequently, the children of Israel did not go directly from the desert to the promised land. There were a few detours along the way, and many of them fell in the desert. They meant to do well, no doubt. But then there was Moses, who was gone on some kind of phone call with God up on a mountain, and they didn't know what to do. And Aaron, who always seemed more responsive to the people than Moses did, after all, Aaron had this idea. Maybe it was just to cover the bases, you know. You don't want to be so narrow that you only worship this one God. And so they thought about some other God, maybe have some idols. And if you're going to do it, might as well do it right. And so, yada, 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 there's this golden calf that they are dancing around. And Mo comes down from the mountain. He is lugging tablets. He is not happy. Nothing worked out well. What happened? They fell. The commentators tell us that this famous story, the golden calf story, was one of the most shameful stories in Israel's history. It was the warning they taught all their children. Don't be like that. Chris Bailey, right here, was telling me that he needed to be gone from last month's men's breakfast because he runs the Idols sound for Troy. I thought, that seems kind of weird. I don't understand why you're just running idolatry as sound. Well, it turns out it is Troy's version of American Idol. It's a singing competition. And when we think of idolatry, it's something that gives us a little smile. It's a TV show. It's a cool car. We just had friends buy way too expensive cars. It's a collection of rare items. It's our own amazing figure, you know, that sort of thing. The truth is, we aren't real clear on what is idolatry and what is just admiring something. And yet, if we apply this story of the Exodus to our own spiritual life, we know that idolatry can cause us to fall. So what is idolatry? Idolatry is giving allegiance to anything that is more important to us than God. And Lent is a good time to ask ourselves what our idols are. That opinion maker that you read often or that you watch often, that person is not more important than the Lord. That urgency you have about appearing as if you have it all together rather than allowing someone to see your weakness, that's an idol and it needs to go. Remember that the Lord said to Paul, in your weakness I am strong. Check your own heart and life for what idols keep you from Him. And wherever you find that in your life, root it out. Idolatry can lead to a fall, but it is not the only challenge. There is also can be a bit of temptation that leads us astray. Maybe you know that old saying that begins with the first line from the Lord's Prayer, lead me not into temptation, I can find it myself. Well, those wilderness wanderers, they faced temptations. There were the ladies of Midian. Perhaps they turned a quite nice ankle and they had a come-hither sense about them. And more than one Israelite man fell in love and fell for a good looker and embraced her and her values, which means her idols. And that cost them. They dropped dead by the thousands through plague, as we read in the book of Exodus. And let me ask you this. Is there a bright, shiny object that attracts you, like a siren's song from your values? we were hearing about a story of a young man who was cheating on his wife, kind of. That is, he's a high school teacher, and there was a mother to one of his players that he was online with for months, and they had this online affair, oddly enough. Now, what's going on? He had become addicted to this crazy behavior. Now his wife wonders if she can stay, and their beautiful family with 2 children is teetering. Don't let a moment's pleasure bring a lifetime of regret. And by the way, if you just ask me, online relationships, how stupid is that? But that's just me. His final example is a twofer. It illustrates that they wanted to test God, and just for good measure, he tells them not to grumble. The illustration he alludes to comes from one of the weirder stories from the Exodus journey. Here it is. They traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom. But the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. Then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived. Am I right? Is that a weird story? There are a number of movies that my lovely wife cannot watch. She doesn't want to see scary movies. She doesn't want to see any movie with gore in it. She doesn't even want to see movies with a lot of tension in it. Basically, rom-com all the way is what we're talking about here. But if there's one genre of movies she most wants to avoid, it is any movie or situation involving snakes. We just spent an entire 2 days on the plane. She does not want to be thinking about snakes on a plane. What we see in this whole situation was that the people they're becoming angry with how things are going. They don't like their direction, or more specifically, they don't like their life's direction. Ever been there? You've been wondering what the plan is? You don't know exactly why you are living where you are living, or why your situation has gone the way it has gone. And on one of those particularly hard days, you tell the Lord you could do much better positioning yourself, and you expect Him to do that. You test Him. If you are really the Lord, do something, you say. Isn't it interesting that Jesus Himself said that this story of the snakes and all pointed to Him? I mean, if you think of the ultimate example of following the Lord on a difficult path, it is Him in the garden saying, "Lord, let this cup pass from me." But in His famous discussion with Nicodemus on another night, before He utters the world's most famous verse about God so loving the world, He says this: "Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in Him."